"Don't reject me. I can give you what no other woman can," whispered the Apache woman in the chill. The cold came early that evening, slipping down from the mountains and settling over the land like a heavy blanket. The sky was clear, but the air was sharp enough to sting the skin. The man stood near the fence line of the ranch, pulling his jacket tighter around his body as he finished the last task of the day. He had worked this land for years, long enough to know its moods, its silences, and its dangers. The land did not speak loudly, but it always told the truth. He was a man of routine: wake before sunrise, work until the light faded, eat simply, sleep lightly. His life had been shaped by discipline and distance. People often thought he was cold, but that was not true. He simply learned long ago that showing too much feeling only made life harder. Trust was something he gave rarely, and when he did, it was never without cost. The ranch sat close to Apache land, a place many people talked about but few truly understood. Stories were passed around town, often wrong, often unfair. He did not join those conversations. He believed that land remembered everything, and so did people. History was not something you could erase just by pretending it did not exist. As he locked the gate, he noticed movement near the dirt road. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a stray horse or a coyote. But then he saw her. A woman stood there, still and quiet, as if she were part of the night itself. She wore a long coat, worn but clean, and her dark hair moved slightly in the wind. She did not seem lost, yet she did not move with purpose either. He hesitated. Years of caution told him to keep his distance. Still, something about her presence felt different. She was not asking for help, not waving or calling out. She was simply there. He took a few steps closer, enough to make his presence known without closing the space between them too quickly. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It gets colder fast." She turned her head toward him slowly. Her eyes were steady, sharp, and deeply tired. Not weak tired, but the kind that comes from carrying responsibility for too long. She looked at him as if she had already measured him and found him honest enough to listen. "I know the cold," she said quietly. Her voice was low, steady, and carried no fear. "It doesn't scare me." That answer unsettled him more than silence would have. Most people reacted to warnings with excuses or explanations. She did neither. She simply stated a fact. He nodded once, unsure what to say next. The wind moved between them, cold and restless. "Do you need help getting somewhere?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I just needed to stop here for a moment." He did not press further. Something in her tone told him that questions would only build walls instead of bridges. He glanced toward the dark stretch of land behind her. "This area's not safe at night," he said. "Too quiet, too open." A small smile touched her lips, but it did not reach her eyes. "Quiet is not the same as empty," she replied. That sentence stayed with him. He had lived most of his life believing silence meant absence. Yet the way she spoke made him feel as though silence could be full of things unseen. They stood there, two strangers sharing a moment neither had planned. The cold deepened, and frost began to form along the fence. He noticed that her hands were bare, red from the chill. Without thinking too much about it, he took off one glove and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "You'll need it more than I will," she said. "I'm used to it," he replied. After a brief pause, she accepted the glove. Their fingers brushed for a second, and the contact sent a strange awareness through him. It was not excitement, not fear, something quieter and heavier. Recognition, maybe. "Thank you," she said. He nodded again, unsure why his chest felt tight. "You from the reservation?" he asked, not out of curiosity alone, but because it felt dishonest not to acknowledge what was obvious. "Yes," she said. "My people are just beyond those hills." He followed her gaze. He had seen those hills every day of his working life, but suddenly they seemed different, closer somehow. "I work this land," he said. "Have for a long time." "I know," she replied. That surprised him. "You do?" "Yes, we notice who respects the ground they walk on." He did not know how to respond to that. Compliments made him uncomfortable, especially when they felt earned rather than given lightly. The silence returned, but it was not awkward. It felt deliberate, like a pause in a conversation that had not yet begun. The cold wrapped around them, yet neither moved to leave. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You should find shelter soon," he said. "Night's going to be rough." She looked at him for a long moment. "I will," she said. "I just needed to remember something before I went on." "What's that?" he asked before he could stop himself. "That even in hard places, there are still people who see," she replied. She handed the glove back to him, her fingers lingering just long enough to make the air feel warmer despite the cold. Then she turned and walked down the road, her figure slowly blending into the darkness. He stood there long after she was gone, the quiet pressing in around him. The ranch looked the same as it always had, yet something inside him had shifted. He felt unsettled, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him aware of how closed off his world had become. As he walked back toward the house, her words replayed in his mind. Quiet is not the same as empty. He realized how often he had mistaken loneliness for peace, distance for safety. He had built his life on control and caution, believing that was the only way to survive. Inside the house, he lit a small fire and sat down heavily in his chair. The warmth did little to ease the restlessness in his chest. He wondered who she was, what she had meant by needing to stop, and why her presence had affected him so deeply after such a short encounter. Outside, the wind continued to move across the land, carrying stories older than either of them. And somewhere beyond the hills, the Apache woman walked on, leaving behind more than footprints in the cold. She had left a question in his heart, one he did not yet know how to answer. That night, sleep came slowly, and for the first time in many years, the man understood that the quiet he had surrounded himself with was about to be broken, whether he was ready or not. The days after that cold evening passed more slowly than usual. The man returned to his routine, but something inside him felt unsettled. He woke before sunrise as always, made his coffee, and stepped outside to check the land. The sky looked the same, the hills stood quiet, and the fence lines waited for repair. Yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman by the road. He told himself it was nothing. People crossed paths all the time, especially near land shared by different communities. Still, her words stayed with him. Quiet is not the same as empty. He found himself repeating that line while fixing a broken post or checking water levels. It bothered him how easily she had seen through him with just a few sentences. Later that week, he saw her again. He was driving toward the supply shed near the boundary line when he noticed someone walking along the dirt path. This time, there was no doubt. It was her. She moved steadily, carrying a small bag over her shoulder, her posture calm and upright. She did not look lost or rushed. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she was going. He slowed the truck and stopped a short distance away. For a moment, he considered driving on, but something stronger than habit pushed him to step out. "You're back," he said, keeping his voice neutral. She turned and studied him as if deciding whether this meeting was worth continuing. "So are you," she replied. That almost made him smile, though he did not let it show. "You walking far?" he asked. "Far enough," she said. The morning air was cold but softer than the night they first met. Sunlight touched the ground, bringing out the colors in the dust and grass. He noticed again how alert her eyes were, always aware of her surroundings. "There's a shorter path through the trees," he said, pointing. "Saves time." "I know," she answered, "but today I chose this way." He nodded. He was starting to understand that she did nothing without reason. They walked a short distance together in silence. It felt strange but not uncomfortable. He had spent years avoiding unnecessary conversation, yet with her, the quiet did not feel heavy. "My name is Thomas," he said suddenly. It felt important to say it, even if he did not fully understand why. She looked at him and inclined her head slightly. "I'm Lena." The way she said her name carried pride, not arrogance. It was simply hers. They continued walking until they reached a fork in the path. She stopped there. "This is where I turn," she said. "Can I ask you something?" he said, surprising himself again. She waited. "Why did you stop that night?" he asked. "Out there by the road." She did not answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the hills, where the land rose gently before disappearing into the distance. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "you need to pause before you keep going. Otherwise, you forget why you started." He thought about that long after she left. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes it was early in the morning, sometimes near sunset. They spoke a little more each time, though neither of them rushed the connection. There were no personal questions at first, no heavy confessions, just small exchanges about the land, the weather, and the work that filled their days. He learned that she helped her community with practical things, organizing supplies, assisting elders, guiding younger ones. She did not talk about it with pride or complaint. It was simply part of her life. She learned that he had come to the ranch years ago after leaving a different kind of life behind. He did not say much about his past, and she did not push. Somehow, she seemed to know where the limits were. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in faster than expected. Dark clouds gathered and the wind picked up sharply. He spotted Lena near the boundary fence, struggling to secure a loose tarp that threatened to tear away. Without thinking, he hurried over to help. Together they pulled and tied the fabric down, their movements quick and focused. Rain began to fall, cold and heavy. When they finished, both of them were soaked. He laughed softly, surprised at himself. It had been a long time since laughter came so easily. She looked at him, rain running down her face. "You don't laugh much," she said. "I don't have many reasons to," he replied honestly. She studied him. "You might," she said. "You just don't see them yet." They took shelter under the shed roof until the storm passed. The air smelled of wet earth, clean and sharp. For a moment the world felt smaller, safer. "You keep people at a distance," she said quietly, not accusing, just observing. He stiffened slightly. "That's safer." "For who?" she asked. He had no answer. As the rain slowed, he realized how little he actually knew about her. "Why do you talk to me?" he asked. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because you listen," she said, "and because you don't pretend this land belongs only to you." That struck him deeply. He had always believed respect was shown through actions, not words. Hearing it acknowledged made him feel seen in a way he was not used to. Not everyone welcomed their growing connection. People in town began to notice. A few comments were made, quiet but sharp. He ignored them as he always had, but Lena noticed everything. One evening she said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know," he replied. "Still," she added, "choices have weight." He understood what she meant. Being close to her meant stepping into a space he had avoided all his life, a space shaped by history, pain, and misunderstanding. It would be easier to walk away, but easier did not always mean right. As time passed, he began to look forward to seeing her. The land no longer felt as empty. The quiet held meaning now, not just silence. Yet beneath it all, tension grew. He felt it in the pauses, in the things left unsaid. He sensed that Lena was careful, not because she feared rejection, but because she respected boundaries, even her own. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in deep colors, they stood together near the fence. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "Some connections change things. Once they start, you can't pretend they don't exist." He swallowed. "I know." "Do you?" she asked softly. He wanted to say yes, but the truth was he wasn't sure. He had spent years avoiding exactly this, something real enough to demand a response. As she walked away that evening, he watched her longer than usual. He knew then that whatever was forming between them could not remain unspoken forever. The land held its breath, and so did he, unaware that the quiet moment he feared was already moving closer. The change did not come suddenly. It came slowly, like winter creeping into the land one quiet night at a time. Thomas felt it in small moments, when he caught himself listening for Lena's footsteps, or when he looked toward the hills and wondered where she was. The space between them was no longer empty. It was filled with things neither of them had said. Their meetings continued, but something had shifted. The easy calm they once shared was now mixed with a careful tension. They still spoke about daily matters, about the land, about responsibilities, but deeper thoughts hovered just beneath the surface. Thomas sensed that Lena was waiting for something, though she never pushed him. That patience made him uneasy. One evening, the cold returned sharper than before. The sky turned pale and distant, and the wind cut through clothing like a blade. Thomas stayed late repairing a damaged fence near the far edge of the property. Darkness arrived faster than he expected. As he packed up his tools, he saw a familiar figure standing a short distance away. Lena was there, wrapped in a thick shawl, her hair pulled back against the wind. She looked tired but steady. Not fragile, never fragile, but worn in a way that came from carrying more than one person's weight. "You'll freeze if you stand there," Thomas said, walking toward her. "I know," she replied. "That's why I came now." Her tone caught his attention. There was intention in her voice, a quiet seriousness. He gestured toward the small shed nearby. "Let's get out of the wind." Inside the shed, the air was still and smelled of wood and earth. The walls blocked the worst of the cold, though the chill remained. Thomas leaned against a beam, unsure why his heart was beating faster. Lena stood across from him, her eyes fixed on his face. "You've been pulling away," she said calmly. He frowned. "I haven't gone anywhere." "Your body is here," she said. "Your thoughts aren't." The truth of it hit him harder than he expected. He looked away. "I don't know what you expect from me." "I don't expect," she said. "I speak when silence becomes heavier than words." Outside, the wind howled, pressing against the walls as if trying to listen. "I've lived long enough," Lena continued, "to know when something matters, and this does." Thomas ran a hand over his face. "You don't know me," he said. "Not really." She stepped closer, but not too close. "I know enough. I know you choose distance because it feels safer. I know you carry old weight you never set down." He laughed softly without humor. "That sounds simple when you say it." "It isn't simple," she said, "but it is true." Silence fell again, the kind that presses against the chest. Finally, Lena spoke the words she had been holding back. Her voice dropped, not weak but intimate in its honesty. "Don't reject me," she said. "I can give you what no other woman can." The words hung between them, warm against the cold. Thomas stiffened. His first instinct was fear, not of her, but of what acceptance would demand. "You shouldn't say things like that," he said quietly. "Why?" she asked. "Because they scare you." "Yes," he admitted before he could stop himself. She nodded as if she expected that answer. "What I offer isn't comfort," she said. "It's truth. It's standing beside someone without trying to change them. It's loyalty that doesn't fade when things get hard." He looked at her then, really looked. The lines of exhaustion, the strength in her posture, the calm certainty in her eyes. She was not asking for rescue. She was offering partnership. "You think I'm strong enough for that?" he asked. "I know you are," she said. "You just don't believe it yet." That was too much, too close to the truth he avoided. He took a step back. "I can't," he said. "I won't." She did not flinch, but something dimmed slightly in her eyes, not hope but expectation. "Because of what others will say?" she asked. "Because of what I'll lose," he replied. She studied him for a long moment. "Sometimes," she said softly, "what you think you're protecting is the very thing keeping you alone." The words landed deep. Still, fear won. "I'm not the man you think I am," Thomas said. "I never said you were perfect," she replied. "I said you were honest." That hurt more than anger would have. He opened the door of the shed, letting the cold rush back in. "You should go," he said. "It's late." Lena did not argue. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped past him. At the doorway, she paused. "I didn't come here to be chosen," she said. "I came here to be seen." Then she walked out into the night. Thomas stood there long after she disappeared, the echo of her words louder than the wind. He felt hollow, as if something important had slipped through his hands without making a sound. The days that followed were heavy. Lena did not come by. The paths they once shared remained empty. Thomas told himself this was for the best. That returning to quiet meant returning to control. But the quiet felt different now. It felt broken. He found himself replaying the moment in the shed again and again. Her voice, her certainty, the offer he had refused. He realized she had not spoken from need but from strength. That scared him more than vulnerability ever could. One afternoon, he overheard a conversation in town. Someone mentioned Lena helping an elderly family after a supply shortage. No praise, no recognition. Just quiet action. That night, Thomas sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. He understood then that what she offered was rare, not because of emotion, but because of steadiness. She had offered to walk beside him without erasing herself, and he had turned away. Outside, the wind moved across the land, carrying the sound of distant drums from beyond the hills. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a choice already made. He did not know yet whether regret or understanding would come first, but one truth was clear now. The whisper in the cold had changed him, and there would be no returning to silence the same way again. The days after that night felt longer than any Thomas could remember. He returned to his work, hoping the routine would pull him back into balance. He woke early, fixed fences, checked water lines, and walked the land just as he always had. But the land felt different now. Not hostile, not broken, just quieter in a way that made him notice his own thoughts too clearly. Lena did not return. At first he told himself this was expected. He had asked her to leave. He had closed the door with his own words. Distance was what he chose, and distance was what he got. Still, the absence settled into him like a slow ache. He kept catching himself looking toward the road, half expecting to see her figure moving through the dust. Each time, the space remained empty. The quiet he once valued now felt sharp. He tried to ignore it. He worked longer hours, pushing his body until exhaustion forced sleep. But even sleep offered no peace. His dreams were filled with unfinished conversations and paths that split before he could choose a direction. He would wake before dawn, heart heavy, staring at the ceiling as cold light crept into the room. In town, things were no easier. People watched him more closely now. Some nodded as usual, others looked away. A few whispered, not caring whether he heard or not. He had lived with judgment before, so that part did not bother him. What troubled him was how often Lena's name surfaced in casual conversation. "She's helping the elders again," someone said one afternoon near the supply store. "She's always doing that," another replied. "Never asks for anything." Thomas stood a short distance away, pretending to check a list, while every word settled deep in his chest. He realized how little people truly saw her. They noticed her actions, but not her weight, not the responsibility she carried without complaint. One evening, a sudden problem pulled him from his thoughts. A section of fencing near the boundary had collapsed after days of strong wind. If it wasn't fixed quickly, livestock could wander into unsafe ground. Thomas grabbed his tools and drove out just before sunset. As he worked, the sky darkened faster than expected. The wind returned, cold and restless. His hands moved automatically, but his mind wandered. He remembered how Lena had stood beside him in worse weather, steady and focused. The memory made his chest tighten. When he finished, he stood still for a moment, looking toward the hills. The land beyond the fence stretched quiet and wide, holding stories older than he could imagine. He felt suddenly small, not in a weak way, but in a way that stripped away pride. For the first time, he allowed himself to ask the question he had been avoiding. What if he was wrong? Back at the house, the fire burned low. He sat at the table, staring at nothing. He realized that his rejection of Lena had not protected him. It had only exposed how afraid he was of being truly known. He had convinced himself that solitude was strength. But now, solitude felt like hiding. Days passed. Still, Lena did not come. Then one afternoon, he saw her truck parked near the community center by the boundary. He stopped without thinking. For a moment, he stayed inside his own vehicle, unsure whether he had the right to approach her now. His heart beat harder than it had in years. He saw her through the open door, speaking with an older woman, handing over supplies with gentle patience. Her movements were calm, her voice steady. She looked tired, but purposeful. Seeing her like that stirred something deep inside him. When she finished and stepped outside, she noticed him. Her expression did not change much. No anger, no warmth, just awareness. "Thomas," she said. "Lena," he replied. They stood facing each other, the space between them full of everything they had not said since the shed. He felt the urge to explain himself, to speak quickly before courage failed him, but she waited, and that patience forced him to be honest. "I was wrong," he said finally. She studied his face. "About what?" "About pushing you away," he said. "About thinking distance would keep things simple." She folded her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. "Simple doesn't always mean right," she said. "I know that now," he replied. His voice was quiet but firm. "I thought rejecting you would keep my life unchanged. Instead, it showed me how empty it already was." She did not respond right away. The wind moved gently between them, carrying the sounds of distant voices and footsteps. "I didn't come to you for comfort," she said at last, "and I won't come back out of pity." "I wouldn't ask you to," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know I see it now, what you offered, what it meant." Her eyes searched his, measuring truth the way she always did. "Seeing something and choosing it are not the same," she said. "I understand," he replied. "And I don't expect anything, I just couldn't stay silent anymore." That honesty mattered. She nodded once. "That's good," she said. "Silence can become its own kind of harm." They stood there a little longer, talking quietly. Not about the past night, not about promises. Just about the work, the coming cold, the people who depended on them in different ways. It felt careful but real. When they parted, it was without certainty, but without bitterness. After that, things changed slowly, not dramatically. They saw each other again, but not as often. When they spoke, it was measured, respectful. Trust, Thomas realized, was not something you demanded back after breaking it. It was something you earned through consistency. He began helping more beyond the ranch, offering his time where it was needed, without expectation of praise. Not to impress anyone, but because Lena had shown him what quiet responsibility looked like. One evening, while repairing a shared water line near the boundary, Lena arrived to check progress. They worked side by side, exchanging only brief comments. Yet the silence felt different now. It held effort, not avoidance. As the sun dipped low, she paused and looked at him. "You're changing," she said. "I'm trying," he replied. "That's all anyone can do," she said. Later that night, Thomas sat alone again by the fire. But the loneliness no longer felt absolute. He understood now that rejection had consequences, not just for Lena, but for himself. He had faced that truth, and it had hurt. But it had also opened a door he thought was sealed forever. Outside, the land rested under the stars, patient as always. Thomas knew the future was uncertain. He did not know whether Lena would ever fully trust him again. But he knew this much with clarity he had never had before. Some offers come only once, not because people leave, but because moments pass. And whether or not redemption was possible, understanding had already begun. The quiet remained, but it was no longer empty. Time did not rush forward after that. It moved slowly, carefully, as if it were waiting to see what Thomas would do next. He did not expect forgiveness, and he did not try to force closeness. Instead, he focused on living differently, letting his actions speak where words once failed him. Winter settled in fully. The mornings were colder, the nights longer. Thomas spent more time repairing things that had been ignored for years: old gates, worn paths, broken lines. Some of the work was his responsibility, some of it was. Still, he showed up. He understood now that showing up mattered more than explanations. Lena noticed. She did not comment on it at first. She simply observed the way she always did. She saw him helping without being asked, staying late without complaint, listening more than speaking. She saw that his change was not sudden or loud. It was steady. They spoke occasionally, sometimes while working, sometimes when paths crossed by chance. The conversations were simple. There were no promises, no heavy talks, just presence. One afternoon, a problem arose that affected both sides of the land. A water source near the boundary had frozen over, leaving several families struggling. It would take effort from more than one person to fix it. Thomas heard about it and went out early the next morning with tools and supplies. When he arrived, Lena was already there. She looked surprised but did not question why he had come. They worked together without much conversation, focused on the task. The cold bit at their hands, but neither complained. By midday, the water was flowing again. As they stood back to inspect their work, Lena finally spoke. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Thomas replied. "But I wanted to," she studied him. "Wanting to help is different than wanting to be seen helping." "I wasn't thinking about that," he said. "I was thinking about what needed to be done." A small pause followed. Then she nodded. "That matters." They sat on a nearby rock to rest, the winter sun low in the sky. The moment felt calm, honest, no pressure, no expectations. "You know," Lena said quietly, "when I spoke to you that night, I wasn't asking you to choose me." Thomas looked at her. "I understand that now." "I was telling you who I am," she continued, "what I bring into someone's life." He breathed slowly. "I was too afraid to hear it." "Yes," she said simply. "I thought strength meant standing alone," he admitted. "I didn't realize it could also mean standing beside someone without losing yourself." She met his eyes. "That's something many people never learn." The silence that followed felt different from all the others they had shared. It was not heavy. It was settled. As weeks passed, their connection grew in small, meaningful ways. Shared work, shared silence, shared understanding. There were still limits. Trust does not return all at once, but respect had found its place again. One evening, Thomas found himself walking toward the hills after finishing his chores. He did not know why his feet carried him there, only that they did. The land felt familiar now in a deeper way, as if it had accepted his change. He thought about the life he had lived before, controlled, distant, protected. It had kept him safe, but it had also kept him from growth. Lena had not broken his walls. She had shown him that he built them too high. When he returned home that night, he slept more peacefully than he had in months. Spring came slowly, softening the edges of winter. The land changed, and so did Thomas. He laughed more easily. He spoke more honestly. He no longer mistook isolation for peace. One day, as they walked together along a familiar path, Lena stopped and looked out over the land. "Do you ever regret that night?" she asked. "Yes," Thomas said without hesitation. "But not because it hurt, because it taught me something I needed to learn." She turned toward him. "Pain that teaches is not wasted." "I know," he replied. "And I know I don't get to rewrite that moment, but I can live differently after it." She studied him for a long time. Then she spoke words that carried weight. "What I offered you then is still who I am, but it isn't something I give to someone who hasn't learned to carry it." He nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time there was no distance in her eyes. "You're learning," she said. "That's rare." They continued walking. Whether their path would fully join or remain parallel was something neither rushed to decide. What mattered was that they now walked with awareness, not fear. Thomas understood at last what Lena meant all along. She had offered him something no one else could, not because she was better, but because she was real. She offered truth, endurance, and partnership without losing herself. And in learning to understand that, he had finally learned how to stand, not alone, not hidden, but honest. The land rested quietly around them, not empty, not silent but full.